The history of space exploration. We human beings have been venturing into space since October 4, 1957, when the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, USSR, launched Sputnik, the first artificial satellite to orbit Earth. For several years, the two superpowers had been competing to develop missiles, called intercontinental ballistic missiles, ICBMs, to carry nuclear weapons between continents. The United States made two failed attempts to launch a satellite into space before succeeding with a rocket that carried a satellite called Explorer on January 31, 1958. Working for the U.S. Army at the Redstone Arsenal in Huntsville, Alabama, the German rocket engineers were led by Werner von Braun and had developed the German V-2 rocket into a more powerful rocket, called the Jupiter C, or Juno. This was for an experiment operated by researcher James Van Allen, which, together with measurements from later satellites, proved the existence of what are now called the Van Allen radiation belts around Earth. When it began operations in October of 1958, NASA absorbed what had been called the National Advisory Committee for Aeronautics, NACA, and several other research and military facilities, including the Army Ballistic Missile Agency, the Redstone Arsenal, in Huntsville. The first human in space was the Soviet cosmonaut Yuri Gagarin, who made one orbit around Earth on April 12, 1961, on a flight that lasted 108 minutes. Shepard's suborbital flight lasted just over 15 minutes. In addition to launching the first artificial satellite, the first dog in space, and the first human in space, the Soviet Union achieved other space milestones ahead of the United States. Less than 4 months after Gagarin's flight in 1961, a second Soviet human mission orbited a cosmonaut around Earth for a full day. The USSR also achieved the first spacewalk and launched the Vostok 6 mission, which made Valentina Tereshkova the first woman to travel to space. During the 1960s, NASA made progress toward President Kennedy's goal of landing a human on the Moon with a program called Project Gemini, in which astronauts tested technology needed for future flights to the Moon, and tested their own ability to endure many days in spaceflight. This was followed by NASA's Skylab space station, the first orbital laboratory in which astronauts and scientists studied Earth and the effects of spaceflight on the human body. During the 1970s, NASA also carried out Project Viking, in which 2 probes landed on Mars, took numerous photographs, examined the chemistry of the Martian surface environment, and tested the Martian dirt, called regolith, for the presence of microorganisms. Since the Apollo lunar program ended in 1972, human space exploration has been limited to low Earth orbit, where many countries participate and conduct research on the International Space Station. However, unpiloted probes have traveled throughout our solar system. In recent years, probes have made a range of discoveries, including that a moon of Jupiter, called Europa, and a moon of Saturn, called Enceladus, have oceans under their surface ice that scientists think may harbor life. Meanwhile, instruments in space, such as the Kepler Space Telescope, and instruments on the ground have discovered thousands of exoplanets, planets orbiting other stars. This era of exoplanet discovery began in 1995, and advanced technology now allows instruments in space to characterize the atmospheres of some of these exoplanets.